Hello and welcome to the Michael Harding podcast. You're very welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I know you're not here in the room with me, but you are in the room with yourself. And even though there's a kind of a virtual togetherness, but there's a fracture in time because you're listening to this at least a few hours after I've actually recorded it. We're not on a live stream. But to some extent, I can anticipate your presence with me and feel you here. And I'm sure in some way that you can anticipate, or not anticipate, but encapsulate my presence, which is a memory, it's a recording, but you can encapsulate it and feel it virtually as if it's really present to you in this moment. And in that sense, the two of us are here together. And that gives me a huge amount of joy because I feel you've kept me company for a long while now, and I'm grateful. I was going to tell you a story this week about fracking, or that just involved, there's a mention of fracking in the memory. And I was saying to myself then, well, why talk about fracking? Fracking is over. Fracking doesn't happen in Ireland now. But there was a time about 7 years ago, it was a huge important thing. And everybody was worried, and they were worried particularly around places like Leitrim because they planned fracking in Fermanagh around Belcoo, and they also planned fracking, I think, in West Cavan. Then they were going to frack around Lough Allen. I think they were going to frack in Lough Allen or something. The mind boggles looking back 7 years, but at the time everybody was worried. I remember, I may have told this story before, but I remember going into a bar one day, and there was a woman I knew coming out, a young woman, and she was looking really tired, and I said, how are you doing? And she said, I'm exhausted. I said, what's the problem? She said, I'm worn out with this fracking. And I said, but should they're not fracking? But she was worn out worrying about it. And I think they were right to worry, and I think that the kind of people who agitated against fracking helped when some particular TD in the Dáil brought in a bill to ban it, and all the parties voted in agreement. And so we end up in a country, in the Republic of Ireland, where there is no fracking. So glad about that. But what I'm remembering now is how people were exhausted by that issue. And at the same time, it is gone. It's over. Nobody's worried about fracking in Leitrim the way they used to be. What are they worried about now? They're worried about COVID. And maybe a time will come when we've moved on from COVID and people are not worried about that. I think that's the one piece of wisdom that comes with age, the realization that everything passes, that nothing is permanent. Whether it's a war or a famine, whether it's a grief or a loss, it's just one of the deep realizations you get as you age, that everything passes. Everything. There's nothing permanent. I was sorting out my archive this morning before I did this podcast because I bought a whole lot of boxes in town to store stuff in. So I'm going through all my A4 files and I'm looking at what is relevant, what I should store for the future, or what I should just throw out because it's only rubbish. And again, I came across letters that I wrote 30 years ago, looking for jobs, application forms I filled in to get little grants from, Leitrim Partnership, to do workshops. I saw letters from people in Saskatoon who were putting on a play of mine. And all those things mattered to me at the time. All those letters were really alive on my desk and mattered to me. And yet they're just there, getting old in boxes, forgotten because the moment has passed. Nothing is permanent. And even my CV, it's a very funny thing to look at an old CV. And to see what you put on it 20 years ago, as if it mattered, as if, you were writing how important you were to impress somebody when you'd be trying to get a job. And then you look back on it in context of years, and it seems such a fleeting thing. All my anxieties then have gone, I have to say. And now I have new anxieties. And that's just a real, profound sense of realization that I've got as I get older, and that is, everything is impermanent. And that insight, there's another thing about that insight, it comes naturally. There's insights that previous generations struggled to find, and yet we seem to pick them up automatically. There's golden nuggets of wisdom that our ancestors had to dig up and quarry out of their own psyche, and yet we find them like as if they were strewn on the pathway before us. There's some kind of evolution of ideas goes on. There's some kind of evolution of wisdom. There's some kind of, ongoing revelation. That was a very beautiful thing in the Christian tradition, that in some sense everything is the revelation of God. You get it it's in Islam as well, that sense that, God is the secret that longs to be revealed, and that in every leaf there's a revelation. Every growing leaf on the tree at the minute is a revelation about being, about the wisdom and depth of being. That sense of realization is very easy for us in ways that maybe 1,000 years ago people struggled to quarry that same insight out of their own psyche. And that makes you feel gifted, that it's like we're standing on the shoulders of the ancestors who went before us. And not just in the wisdom of philosophy and religion, but just in the wisdom of everything. Look at what we have. Don't look at the negatives for a minute. Don't look at the kind of problems of climate change and overpopulation and greed and capitalism and all that, and the wars, famines. Just look for a moment at the positive side of what we have. The sense of communication, internet, education, the emergence of, human rights, equality for women, the emergence of a deeper sense of being human. And then on top of that, all the technology and all the medicine and all the health. Imagine that I was in hospital, for example, for 2 weeks, and I had an operation. 4 weeks ago today, I had an operation on the spine, in the dural area of the spine, on the veins, arteries. Now imagine that even 30 years ago, that operation could not have been done, and what was wrong with my body would have remained wrong until it dragged me down to the grave. Or imagine that 2 years earlier I got a stent in, and if I went back to my father's time, that could not have been done and would not have been imagined. And he would have sat in the corner. If he did have a problem with an artery in his heart, he would have sat in the corner, a kind of a tired, exhausted man, for 5 or 6 years until the grave dragged him down. And as well as looking at the injustice whereby so many people don't have access to that medicine, whether it's people in Ireland or people in Europe or people globally in developing countries who don't have access to medicine, there's the injustice. And it's worth dwelling on it and changing it. But at the same time, it's sometimes worth just meditating for a moment on the amazing miracle that we are alive now, that we live in these times is to live in blessed times. No matter what the catastrophes. It's as if they're both balanced. Do you know what I mean? It's as if the catastrophes continue to mount. It's as if you think you have trouble with fracking, wait till you hear about COVID, right? And God knows what's down the track in another 10 years for the world. Trouble. But it also seems to be balanced by a kind of evolution of good things, of good wisdom, of good insight, a deepening constantly of what it is to be human. I look at some people in the world just through the newspapers or anywhere, and I'm humbled by the sense of enlightened human compassion that they display. I look at my family and I look at my neighbours. I'm looking at enlightened Buddhas. We're all enlightened bodies. I do say that. Like we're all completely full of light. It's just that we have these sort of karmic forms, these gross bodies that we struggle through this lifetime, trying to reach the perfection of the goodness that is already in us. The light and the beauty and the pure light, the pure compassion that is in us. I do think, wouldn't it be lovely if I could access it, Wouldn't it be lovely if I could just more deeply access my own potential of love? And that's again where I use mentor deities, religion, because I don't know any other way to do that. I'm like the alcoholic who relies on a higher being, not because he has a fetish about higher beings, not because she has a fetish about higher beings, but simply because it's a mechanism that keeps the alcoholic away from the bottle of alcohol. And so too the sense of a higher being, of abandonment, reliance on a greater being. It's not because I have a fetish about it, but it's because I don't know any other way that will keep me at a distance from sadness, sorrow, melancholy, and despair, and sustains me in a sense of joy and positivity and wonder about the nature of being alive. In the midst of death we are in life, in the midst of life we're in death. It's the dark things continue to emerge, the fracking, the this, the that, the other, and at the same time, balanced with it, there seems to be this ongoing evolution of insight and wisdom and realization that makes you feel there's a profound truth in that Islamic phrase, God is the secret longing to be revealed. There's a lovely idea about longing. How we long for things is kind of, it's both our pain and our joy as human beings, that we long for stuff. There's a beautiful series on Netflix that I'm watching at the moment. It's called Shtisel. It's Israeli, and it's about ultra-Orthodox Jews, and they're completely, they're mad. You wouldn't believe the carry-on of them, but yet they're beautiful human beings. They're portraits of human beings who have longings, simple longings. A woman's longing for a man's longing for a woman's longing for a child, a human longing for God, a longing for other people and for intimacy. The things we long for, intimacy, peace, love. Strange, isn't it? Longing is just so human. And again, if anybody's listening to this as wanting to pick up, how do I tell stories and how would that be helpful to somebody's writing? Well, here's one of them, Rather than write about ideas, rather than write about political agendas, write about longing. When you write about longing, you can write about a little parish and a man walking along the street, going in and out of his neighbours' houses. And if you talk about his longing, you have a human story that will be universal. Just imagine a couple living in a village and he wants a dog. He'd love to have a little dog to go for his walks. And imagine the lady wife, really for her own reasons, maybe she was bitten by a dog and she says, there'll be no dogs in this house. And she puts down her foot, and because marriage and relationship is give and take, he agrees to let it go, let it be, okay, no dog for me in this house. And imagine him every day getting up and going off for his little walk in the morning for 40 minutes, into the park and around the circle and back by the river or the canal or whatever. And he's doing this, and all the time he's looking at other people with dogs. And he's longing for a dog. Now there's a lovely place for a short story to start, because you're touching the root of something that's completely universal. It's not a story about a man. It's not a story about an Irish person. It's not a story about an ethnic group. It's not a story about ideas. It's not a story about oppression or patriarchy or anything. It's just a story about a human longing. And that would be one of my little nuggets, is how to tell story or how to write. There's a funny way that longing is fulfilled in the God notion, the idea of there being some presence which is cosmic, universal, and here and now, that constantly calls us to awaken in relationship and in love with presence, just being here now. It's like one of the saints, I don't know who it was, said, our hearts are restless until they rest in you, God. It's like all our longing has in it the longing for God, longing for, I wish, I don't know, I wish I could write a good book. I wish I could write a good story. I wish I could have more listeners on my podcast. I wish I could write a really clever tweet and it'd go viral. I wish I could have a dog. I wish I could have another cat, or maybe just an iPad. I think even our longing for material things, it's like not as beautiful. Obviously, if I long for a child, if I long for the beloved to appear to me, if I long for intimacy, these are very warm, heartfelt longings. And maybe when we long for material things like, a new car or a new iPad, they're kind of, if you like, they're fossilized longings. They're longings that have turned to stone, to a deadness, because there's something deeply unsatisfying about the longing for a car. And I say that because I long for a car. Like, I have a new car, but I'm always longing for cars. It's one of the little things that must have got into my head when I was about 18 years of age, that if you had a nice car, it'd be the perfection of life. And here I am at 67 years of age, and I'm still unable to pass through the car park without me eye falling on the number plates of some beautiful Peugeot or Toyota or Range Rover. Oh God, you don't see too many of them now around Leitrim, but you'd see more of them around Mullingar. I used to see a lot of the old big four-wheel, and I remember when I was in Mullingar, I got a Mitsubishi one time. Now I think it was 03, and I bought it in 07, so I was only 4 years of age, and it hadn't been used much, and it was cheap enough, and I bought it because I needed a truck or some sort of big four-wheel to pull a horse box. The daughter at that time being in secondary school and going to show jumping on the weekends, and we needed a big four-wheel drive. So it was an excuse for me, I pretended I was doing it unselfishly for the family, but sure, it was a pure excuse that I could sit up high in the Pajero spinning along the road, and I loved it. Oh, mother of God, I was so happy in that Jeep because I'd never been in a Jeep before. I still long for cars, and I'm also a bit attached, I have to confess, to the old computers. Like, I have a desktop and I have a laptop, and they're all modern, but like I change it. 2 years and I'm wanting to change to a more powerful machine. And I can excuse it by saying, well, that's me work, but it's a longing. And I think that all those longings are fossilized. They're not longings of the deep heart. But the longings of the deep heart are those beautiful longings for love and intimacy, for human warmth and comfort. And the deeper you go into those longings for comfort and warmth, they don't turn rotten. They don't turn you into something bitter because you don't have it. They actually ultimately open your heart to what's behind that longing. And it is the great secret. It's the great presence that's calling you, drawing you forth. And when you realize that, you come to peace. You come to the realization that there is only now. There is no past, there is no future. This is eternal life. This is forever, this moment. You are here, you are here, you are here. It's so beautiful. And then the longing falls away. All the small longings fall away. All the senses of what has been, the fracking, the COVID, the grief, the loss, everything begins to fade as you more completely enter the present, knowing that you've found in that present real being, real presence, timeless presence, just now, just here, this moment. No more longing, no more impermanence, just this sense of love. You don't think your way towards that moment in the present time. It's something that opens in your heart and is felt in the heart. I am here. I am present. I'm so grateful that you're here, and thank you for being here. And I'll close off now, and I will do another little podcast later on related to this one about who am I. So thank you for being here. Bye-bye.